you know, being stuck inside an office, and you know, you don't get a whole lot of greenery. So that's just sort of what we strive to do with the company.
And how about now, during this pandemic? Are these businesses still have people in their offices, or what's going on with them?
Surprisingly, yes. It's definitely not as busy and packed as it used to be. You know, there's still lots of offices that are still have like restrictions, so they're only limiting maybe like 2 or 3, depending on the size of the office, employees inside at a time. So we've actually been able to make it work. And even some offices that aren't open, like let's say all week, you know, we still owe it to them to keep their plants alive, because you know they pay for them, or they lease them or rent them from us.
Okay, so that's great to know. Does anybody else listening have any questions for Andrew?
I do. Andrew, what's the name of your company again? I'd like to put it on our Facebook page.
It's Biozenic,
Bio. Yeah.
Zenic.
Okay, and what city are you located in? I mean, are you in San Diego, or which part of San Diego?
Yeah, so we mainly operate in San Diego, but we've done projects up in LA to even as far as like Denver as well.
I mean, are you like in East County, close to downtown? Like what little neighborhood are you in?
Mostly North County. We have a couple clients a little bit further down south. Just trying to think of some off the top of my head. Drawing a blank. We mainly do like like businesses in Del Mar. We have a couple in La Jolla. We do a couple restaurants in UTC, like True Foods. Like we take care of their plants out there.
Nice.
And also a couple, and also the northern in Fashion Valley. That's what it was. I was trying to think of places.
So True Foods, all of them around in San Diego, in all the different cities.
No, just a few select ones. So right now we work in the True Foods and UTC, and then in Fashion Valley we take care of the plants at North Italia. It's a little Italian bistro right there. We're next to Bloomingdale's.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to look you up, and I'm going to say something about you guys.
Cool, thank you.
On our social media.
Judith.
And hey, oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to suggest that maybe Judith remind everybody on the call about the scholarship program more generally. And this is part of what member dues go to, and the garden walk proceeds to support great students like Drew.
Yes, I plan on saying that. I wouldn't forget that, because that's really what I think we're all about, is giving back. And this is the way we give back, through scholarships.
So do you think we should start the meeting officially at this point? We're 7 minutes in, Angie?
I think so. I mean, we don't have we met Andrew. So, I mean, everybody knows it's here. How many people do we have on here now? That we give scholarships to colleges around the city for specifically.
I'll talk about that.
Okay, well, go talk about it quickly so we can.
Okay. So I was going to start the meeting my portion by saying welcome back. Hope everybody had a wonderful staycation. I'm Judith Krumholz, co-chair of the scholarship committee with Sherry Betancourt Brooks. Also, Kathy Lopez is part of our group. For those who know, our mission statement is to educate, to engage, to beautify, and to give back. And the way we give back is through scholarships. We give scholarships to students at 4 community colleges: Cuyamaca, Southwestern, Miracosta, and City College. Should I say all 4? You can check out the bios and pictures of this year's recipients on our scholarship page. In addition to Andrew, there is Paula and Suzanne. This coming year, we've decided to give scholarships to the same 4 community colleges again. We give $1,000 scholarships, but we're focusing on the Sustainable Urban Agricultural Program at City College. That offers a unique learning experience unlike any other Southern California. All agricultural classes combine hand-on experience at their own 1-acre farm. They also have raised beds, and they also have a greenhouse, and they also have an orchard. It's just a fantastic program. Anyway, thank you for joining us this evening, Andrew, and that's all I have to say for right now. Okay, Angie, that's
Perfect.
it.
Okay, I mean, we're gonna let Mr. Tall speak now. There's not too much more to say. We do have a couple more meetings coming up if you've seen our website.
Oh, I was going to kind of go over just the next two before we introduce Bill. So in October 22nd, actually, we have Nan Sturman who's going to be coming and giving us a tour from gardens around the world. So since we can't travel, like many of us missed trips in different places around the world, we're going to see some beautiful gardens anyway. So that's October 22nd. And then on November 19th, Bill Toombs, he started the Eco Life Conservation nonprofit organization. He's a biologist and explorer, and he has traveled all over and gotten involved with many different recovery programs of the condors, and also he has watched monarch butterfly migrations, and so that is going to be his talk, Roar of the Monarch Butterfly. So that should be very fun. So those are the next 2 months before we break for December. So anyway, tonight I'd like to introduce Bill Tall, Farmer Bill, as he's called. He is a native San Diegan, and he founded the City Farmers Nursery in 1972 and is still family owned. And he is all-around gardener. He's an expert in gardening. I don't even know. He's going to tell us everything he knows, I think. But anyway, his title is Why We Do What We Do to Our Gardens, or for our gardens. So I'm going to let him explain that and what he plans to tell us. And welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you very much. This is a really pleasure to do this for the first time. I tried to do a trade show with this kind of thing. That was a mess, but this is very simple thanks to my daughter. I've had the nursery since 1972, but it's never been a job for me. It's always been something I enjoy. And not a lot of people when they're 16 can say, I've done something all my life that I love, and I do. And the reason I do is it's important to sell people things what they need, not what they think they need, and explain it to them so they understand why that they're going to do that. Because for you to go in and buy a bag of potting soil or a soil amendment, you really need to know if you need it. You really need to know how much of it you need so that you're not overdoing or underdoing it. Many times that I've seen landscaping, and this is one in front of our nursery where the architect set up a lot of plant material. And I went and I cut the plant material by 2/3 because it was going to get overcrowded, because people want instant gratification in a landscape. And so I've learned now, instead of teaching people what to do in the garden, is why we do it. And I think where I'd like to start is, it gets very confusing trying to find information. A lot of times people will go on the internet to find information, and they come in with their answers and stuff. And it's also confusing to find quality product. We've been very careful over the years to test product, to stop selling certain products because we didn't think that they were doing good after a period of time. Whether a company changes hands and they cheapen the product. I remember when I was younger, Miracle-Gro potting soil was the soil. Now I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because it's changed hands a couple of times and the manufacturers have messed with the recipe. And so we keep an eye on that when we buy stuff from things. We also won't buy from companies that are buying up other companies. We like supporting smaller companies, startup companies and things like that, because they have more unique things, new stuff, and they've done more research. So when we have customers come in, they come in with a plant problem. A lot of times pictures will work, sometimes they won't, or they'll have a soil problem. And years ago, I used to do it a little bit more cruder than I do now. because you have to know what your soil consists of, what you're planting, and what you need to add to the soil. Different crops need different growing conditions. San Diego is full of plant material from all over the world. And so you need to find out where kind of the part of the world it came from. Did it need an acid soil, an alkaline soil, a well-draining soil, a clay soil? And same thing even with natives. You know, people come in buying native plants. And the rule of thumb, and a lot of people like to hear this, is that when you plant a native, you don't amend the soil, you don't fertilize it. Well, depending on where you buy the native, the person that grows it, they're using a type of soil that might not be conducive to your yard, but it grows good in that soil. And so by digging a hole and planting that plant in its potted soil into your soil, you're causing a problem, and it's called water hydraulics. It's where their soil might hold more moisture than the soil around it, and vice versa. So you end up having a watering problem. And so by knowing what to mix into the soil for the plant is important. And most of the time as a soil amendment, we don't do an analysis of it. The company that I sell their plants for, it's called Moose Creek Nursery. I know Mission Hills does, and a lot of us independents do. It's a very, very good company. I've known Sue and her husband when they started. They've been around so long. And they developed into a very good source of information. But when I went to start buying from them, I said, you know, I need a soil amendment for your plant material. And so they went and ended up giving me the recipe of the soil mix they use that they grow their plants in. And so what I did was I created that soil that they grow their plants in as amendment for the soil around the plant they're planting. So that way, when you take the plant out and loosen the root ball, what comes off the roots and what you amend your soil with is the same soil that it's growing in. And so thus your watering will be more evenly. The plant won't shock as much. Okay. And then another thing that people, go ahead. Something happened. I got numbers in front of me. Can you hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, there you are. Okay. Anyways, so the other thing is they always say don't fertilize native plants. All plants need fertilizer. Depending on where they're growing, they're getting natural fertilizer. You know, if they're growing in the outback, they've got coyotes, they've got rabbits, they've got squirrels, and all these plants, all these animals defecate. And so they're getting their food from those or from the birds that poop or whatever. So they're getting some kind of fertilizer. In our front yard, we don't have any coyotes and stuff running around. So we need to mimic that by giving them something that will encourage their growth. Okay. So this is why, one of the reasons why when planting native plants, we suggest these things. Because most of us independent nurseries can't afford to guarantee our plants. Because the places that do, the guarantee goes to the grower. So if you return a plant, the grower is going to end up refunding that or giving that plant back to the place that sells it. So this place that's selling it doesn't lose any money. So that's why they can guarantee their plants. I feel as though if you have a plant that's guaranteed and you don't know how to plant it right, not only you use the plant, but also you lose all the time and energy in the hopes that it would grow. So it's very important. We have a lot of people that are putting raised beds in and planting in the ground. Okay, so the most important thing about all plant material is the quality of your soil. We are a firm believer in recycling, no doubt about it. It's one of our major goals is to become where we have no waste coming off the property. It's a little more complicated with us because we have a restaurant and we have a couple people living on the property. We have an upholstery shop. We have reduced in the past by doing certain things. And so what the important thing is that when you plant your plant, you get quality soil. I'm not saying ours is the only soil. There's very good soils out there. But if you go buy a bag of topsoil, it's a 1 cubic foot bag, that you can lift 2 of them at a time. It's not topsoil. It's got too much organic matter in it. Your topsoil should be mixed with soil, sand, and a organic matter pretty much of equal quality or of equal quantity. Maybe a little more organic matter, but not too much. Because I've seen people where they buy a potting soil and they plant things in it, in a nursery pot, let's say. Well, it gets hot and the stuff's not broken down all the way. And so the plants start suffering because the roots are burning, because the temperature in the soil goes way up. So by having soil, sand, a little clay, and compost, you've got a good mix. Because the only thing that disappears out of your garden when your soil shrinks is organic matter. You lose minerals, you lose fertilizer, you use organic matter. If you were not to amend your soil for a period of time, you'd be left with sand, clay, and soil. And that would be it. That's your base that you work off of. So if you're getting soils, I always tell people to just get a sample of it and see what it's like. You got to check the pH in it. You got to check the quantity of sand, salt, clay. You've got to understand if you're growing something other than regular vegetable plants, let's say you're growing blueberries, strawberries, caneberries, all that stuff, it comes from the northern hemisphere. So you're going to be looking at a lower pH. So you either want some soil that's a lower pH, or you want to treat that soil that you buy to bring the pH down, because at a certain lower pH, the plants will take up their nutrients and live better and all. So it's not just digging a hole and plant it, it's also knowing how big to dig the hole. There's a lot of formulas out there, but I always feel as though never dig the hole deeper than the root ball. Okay, sometimes that conflicts with drainage problems because there's not enough area for the water to get away from the roots. But if you're amending the soil properly that you're planting in, that soil is going to match up with what you're planting, and you're going to have drainage around it. Most of your trees and plants and shrubs don't grow any deeper than 2 to 3 feet. Smaller plants are 1 to 2 feet, and vegetable gardens only need a foot of soil to grow in, and they do fine. And so you start looking at, okay, this is going to be growing that deep. So if you were to buy a 1 gallon plant and it's got a 10-inch root ball, you dig your hole 10 inches deep. But to make that plant grow better, you dig it as wide as you can. So as the plant's developing its size and its energy, the roots will grow out easier into that new soil. And thus, eventually all the organic matter and stuff's going to dissipate, but by that time it's an established plant. Okay, so it's important on the depth, but very important on the width, because that way you're giving the plant the most chances. Another thing people don't realize is when a plant grows, the canopy gets wider and the roots follow shoots, I call it that way. So the roots follow the canopy. So if you were to plant an apple tree up against a wall, the roots are going to grow that way and this way. But if you earth-spoliate it, if you trim it so it's flat against the wall, the roots are just going to grow where the branches grow. They're not going to grow out into the yard because there's no plant material out to warrant the water and food that the plant needs. It's up along where the tree is. But as that tree gets bigger, the roots that take up the most moisture and nutrients are the tip of the roots. The roots near the trunk hardly ever need any fertilizer because it doesn't take up food there. It takes up food at the active growing roots. You need to keep it moist, but your major water and food go at the drip line of a plant. So if you're planting a fruit tree on a slope, it becomes a problem following the drip line unless you trim the plant, or you make a big enough flat level area to plant it in so that you can follow the branches of it and get the water and food where it needs to be. So the method of that is, I just explained. And you need that explanation to understand this is why you do it. And people will dig, they'll get a 15-gallon tree and dig a 4-foot deep hole. What a waste of energy. You know, it's like, you don't need to go 4 foot deep. If you do have a drainage problem, you fill the hole up a couple times, it doesn't drain. You put a plastic pipe in there in what's called a filter sock with holes in it. If there's water sitting on the bottom, you can drop a small pump in there and suck the excess water out. So people think it's for deep watering, but really it's for taking excess water out until the soil firms up enough to where it's not enabling water to fill up in that bottom of that hole. Okay, so we're going to get into a couple other things because it's just, I could spend all night. I know I don't have that long. I want to talk a little bit about pruning trees. We're getting into the tree pruning season, and we have to look at what Mother Nature does to the trees that are out there that are at one time native, and now we've cultivated them into being in our yard, things like citrus and avocados and apples and nectarines and all that, okay? So in the colder areas, that's where our fruit trees originated from, our apples, our cherries and all that. And most of the varieties are grown in these colder areas, okay? So every plant, like the human body, has protective mechanisms. The protective mechanisms are for them to do only one thing. And the one thing that plants need to do in their lifetime is to reproduce. Similar to us, but I think we have more fun. Anyways, and so this is their job. That's why we deadhead roses, because if you don't deadhead them, it's already reproduced its seeds, it's going to give you less flowers. Okay? This is why we prune the whole flower heads off the roses. So in these areas, at these deciduous trees, the trees that drop the leaves grow, it gets really cold. And so what happens is when the ground gets cold, the sap from the plant goes down into the ground and it's stored there, which means that in the limbs is hardly any sap. Okay, and then what happens is a frost will come over. Oh, and the leaves drop, and the leaves land around the plant like a blanket to keep the roots warmer than it is outside. So with the nutrients in the ground and the leaf cover, then the frost comes in and it burns the tree. It'll burn it back in areas maybe a foot or two or 30% or whatever it is, it burns the growth back. And this is healthy for the tree because if it burns the growth back, there's going to be less fruit, but then it's going to be more quality fruit. And this is why we prune. There was a talk out one time that we should prune our fruit trees in summertime. And I'm sitting there going, that makes no Mother Nature sense. That does not happen in Mother Nature. So when the nutrients in the ground come up into the tree, there's not enough room because some of the branches are dead or missing. So that forces your new growth out because it's got to go somewhere, and that pushes new growth for that year or the next year's production. And that's why we prune grapes and all the different deciduous plants, because it's what Mother Nature does. Okay, citrus and avocado trees. Mother Nature doesn't prune them, but they are smart trees. If you didn't prune a fruit tree, you would get hundreds of little tiny fruits, but nothing of quality. That's why Mother Nature has to do it. If an avocado tree or a citrus tree has a lot of fruit on it, and it's too much, and it goes into stress, what does it do? It drops them. It drops them off. That way, what's left of the fruit will produce a quality seed to reproduce. It's interesting. Has anybody ever seen the flowers on an avocado tree? Okay. They're light green. They don't smell. They're not bright. So what happens at a certain time of the year with your avocado trees is it looks like you get leaf burn on the trees, on the edges of the leaves. What it's doing is it's defoliating to expose the flowers to passing by insects that can't see them. Once the flowers get pollinated, it relieves itself in order to protect the fruit from the environment, from sun scald, from passing by prey, animals that would eat it and stuff like that. So this is why you don't need to prune citrus and avocados. If you do need to prune it because of shape, you want to do that after production. So that way it's still got the nutrients in the ground, you trim it out, and then it'll start reproducing. And by production time, it should have new enough growth to go ahead and produce and all. And you can do a lot with citrus and avocado trees. You know, some people say, well, I have no room in my yard. Well, that a whole idea of earth-spalling, which means putting them on a trellis and making a covering for a wall, it works great. We do it with apples. We do it with all slow-growing trees, citrus, apples, pears, figs, just a lot of trees because some people don't have the room. So we plant them, we put them on a trellis, they grow out, people keep them that shape. I have a propane tank here because the city never gave me any natural gas, so we're on propane, my whole property. And it's an eyesore. So an artist come in and paint it look like a big watermelon. But then I planted, my mind doesn't stop. I planted pears and apples around it, which now creates a screen and provides me with fruit. And they're all on trellises, and most of my trimming is on the top so I can get them to spread out sideways. And sometimes you bend the branches and things like that and all. So you can get trees to do what you want. I don't know if any of you grow olives for making oil or for preserving. At one time I was making my own oil. I've experimented so much because I want to know processes. What does it take to get a quart of olive oil? It takes a lot of olives and a lot of oil. But I've got the equipment. It's just way too much for me nowadays. You know, what does it take to produce your own coffee beans? It's a whole process. We don't sell coffee trees because you have to have a lot of trees and you have to do a lot of preparation and getting the husks off and all this kind of stuff. So I decided, I thought of it was a good idea. I said, nah, just leave it to the coffee growers because if you have one plant coming on, you finally get some beans off and all the process you got to do that bean to make it into coffee, you're going to have the jitters before you ever get a cup of coffee out of it. So anyway, so back to trees. So what I've developed is we have about 12 different types of olive trees here. We have oil olives and we have preserving olives. There's two ways to preserve olives. You can either brine them or you can do them in lye. And either or will give you a table olive. And we have certain ones that have more oils in them and certain ones we don't. But I tell people when they plant them, don't let them grow into a tree. Make a hedge out of them. So that way you don't have to get on a ladder to pick the olives. You can go and pick them along this hedge. It'll give you a screening and all. And so thus, it's much easier. You do prune them so you can force new growth for more olives. But it's a great idea not having to get on a ladder. You know, around my house at one time, I don't know if anybody's been to the nursery. If not, please come over. I used to have pine trees around. I loved the idea of my house feeling like it's in the woods. So I had these tall Canary Island pines around it. Well, then solar became an offer to me. I got a free solar system put in years ago by a group called, I forget what it was called, but anyways, and they would give you free solar, but it only covers 75% of your use. Well, still, it's a savings. But I cut the pine trees down because they were blocking the panels. So I planted avocados around my yard, around my house. I've got 6 different trees, so I get production all year. But now I can keep them trimmed below the eaves and let them get wider as a screen and not affect my solar. And so, and they're starting to produce now. I've got 2 trees on the property that will produce, but these are just getting to the point now of production. So I'm finding out that sustainability can be done many different ways without putting ornamentals in, but ornamentals are nice too to look at. I mean, they all have their place and I think that a good choice and mix of them, because people are always worried about water conservation. It's a big thing. It will never go away. We're always going to have a problem because they're building all over the place. We have no new reservoirs. And right now, what scares me is the fires out east, the houses that were burned. There must be something toxic that blew over us and landed in our lakes. I don't know, but it's a possibility. So what I tell people is I have friends that love taking showers. I mean, I have a friend after he goes to the restroom, he takes a shower. I have a friend who takes a shower in the morning and in the evening, every day of the week. I don't know about you guys, when I grew up, I had a bath once a week when I was a kid. But we didn't share water. We weren't that bad. But we had a bath once a week. We took a shower once a week. Well, I do it a little more often now, but I'm not one that takes 2 showers a day because I know that my water can be more beneficial on the plant material that I'm growing, that I can go an extra day without a shower. I'm a very tough person to live with and put up with, but I have my reasoning. It's funny because about 2 years, no, about 4 years, 5 years ago, I decided not to go to the store anymore. So I was growing tilapia. I have chickens. I had eggs. I grew my own turkeys. It takes a lot from a person that's not, you have to have 30 chickens to be able to go ahead and put one down to eat it. You can't have 3 because they become pets, which is kind of interesting for our business because then they're pets for long after they lay their eggs and they're still buying feed. But so this is what I lived off of. I lived off my garden. I don't like buying paper goods because you usually move thrown out. So I went to cloth napkins. And then there was the problem with toilet paper. Has anybody ever used a bidet? They're cool. I got a bidet in my bathroom. I'm the only one in the house that uses it, but I think it's pretty cool. So making use of what you got and following simple things that they used to do in life, let alone Mother Nature. But you had farms that were self-sustaining because they grew fruit trees. They had animals. It was a recycling thing. They got to reuse the stuff to where they didn't have to go to the market that often. And so getting back to gardening, because I'm on a tangent right now. So when you buy a plant, the other thing you need to do is do research on how big that plant's going to get. Because the world is into instant gratification. And if you overplant, you're going to have a problem. It's just, you have plants running into each other. There's no airspace, you create disease problems and things like that. And so you want to see this plant's going to get 4 feet wide, so you space them that way. You spend less money. They eventually get there. They grow faster because they're not competing with each other. I don't know how many people go ahead and buy fruit trees that have more than one type of fruit on the same trunk. They're called salad fruits and salad citrus. And it's a nice idea because you get an arrangement. You can get like 3 pairs that produce at different times of the year, and plums, and you get a citrus that has a lemon and a lime and a tangerine on it. That's cool. But what happens if that one trunk doesn't make it? You lose all your trees. We were taught years ago to plant 3 trees in one hole, 3 citrus, 3 deciduous trees. But when you plant them, the only thing you have to do is stop branches from growing inward to compete with each other. So you trim out all the inward branches and make the branches go outward, and thus you have a continuous supply. Like you could get a early, mid, and late blooming peach, and then you have peaches for a longer extent. Or if you love peaches, you could put 3 peaches in there of the same harvest time, and just get a plethora of different types of peaches to do. So planning things out, knowing where your water lines are and things like that, knowing how you can get stuff simpler is really the key to do it. And lately I've also seen a lot of new product out. And I'm very careful of what we get in new product. Actually, I look for some old product because I think old product has been tried and true. I looked for 15 years to get a product called seed tape. Okay, Burpee came out with tape that they had the seeds stuck in. Well, this is a biodegradable tape that you lay down, and it's got 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch markings. So you can sit on your desk and plant your seeds in it, fold it, put it in the ground, and after the 2nd or 3rd watering, it biodegrades and your plants come up. For 15 years, I found a company finally back east, and we brought it in, and it's something that makes sense. As people want to conserve seeds, they want to go ahead and make sure they're not wasting them. And The other thing that Mother Nature has taught us is seeds need certain conditions to grow, weather-wise, time of year that they're planted, because they won't germinate until Mother Nature gives them that time of year to do it. That's why even though we have growing season all year, some stuff does better in certain times. But the other thing though is people plant seed too deep. Our rule of thumb has always been never plant your seed more than twice their width in depth. Okay? That way, the seed will have enough energy to come up and put up its first set of leaves, which are the beginning leaves, and then the true set of leaves. And a seedling does not take up fertilizer until after the second set of leaves come out. And that's when you can start fertilizing. You know, I have people come in and they buy 6 packs of corn. It's like you can get 50 seeds for a 6-pack of corn, but they're afraid to plant the seed. And I'll ask them, one guy came in, he was having a hard time planting okra. I plant the seeds and stuff doesn't come up. I said, you ever dig a hole and look where and see if the seed's still there? Is there animals in the soil that could eat them? He goes, well, no. And I said, how deep did you plant your okra? He goes, it's about 1 inch deep. I said, seed doesn't have enough energy to get up 1 inch. You got to only plant it more shallow. You know, carrot seed should only be barely covered because it's such a small seed. It doesn't have the energy to go and push through 1 inch of soil before it gets up there at all. So I think what I'm trying to get across to you is when you plant, think Mother Nature will do. They have stuff like they have fertilizer teas that came out with a while ago. And I'm studying it. Well, what's good about fertilizer tea? Well, it takes the fertilizer and takes all the nutrients out, and then you can feed your plants with it. I said, so if I use an organic dry fertilizer on the ground, every time I water it, it's creating a fertilizer tea that's growing in the ground. Plus, you only got to do it once a month. You know? And if you think about it, in nature, it's the same way. You know, the fertilizer sits on the ground, the rain comes and pushes it in the ground, and it creates fertilizer. The important thing, though, is that certain plants need to be fed all year and certain plants don't. If a plant does not have leaves on it, it doesn't need fertilizer. If a plant doesn't have leaves on it, it doesn't need a lot of water because there's no way to get rid of the water. Water leaves through percolation, evaporation, and transpiration. And a plant will not transpire water when there's no leaves on it. So if you're watering a plant, it's losing its leaves a lot. It's probably because the roots are suffocating. The way you can tell if a plant's underwatered or overwatered is you go ahead and if it's dropping its leaves or turning yellow, that's a sign it's one of the two. But you got to go into the soil to figure it out. And so you have to go and not touch the surface because we're taught to put your finger in the soil and if it's dry, water it. Well, anybody knows a plant in a pot, it's wet down here and dry up here. And so thus, it's going to be dry on top, but it's going to be wet on the bottom and it can get too wet. When that happens, when a plant gets too wet, it rots. And that's a fungal disease. If it gets too dry, it desiccates. If a plant desiccates and gets dried out, if you catch it in time, you can rehydrate it. But if it rots, you can't do anything about it, but possibly pull the plant out, cut all the rotten roots off. If you have a plant that dies, you take the plant out of the pot and check your roots. You can check it by, the roots have a little bit of a bark covering on them. So if you were to take the root and just pull on it, if that bark on the root slips off or that outer layer slips off, it got overwatered. If it doesn't and it's dry, that means it didn't have enough water. When I go out to do plant analysis, I take a soil probe. I don't expect all you guys to have it because it's a $100 piece of equipment, but it's just a tube with a hole in it. You shove it in the soil, it brings up a sample. When somebody has just planted a plant, I put it into the root ball, check to see what the water content is, and I put it into the soil next to the root ball to see if it's a matching water content. And a lot of times, it's wet downstairs and dry upstairs, or they didn't water enough. They hand watered and didn't realize how long it takes for water to get in the ground. And it can be wet on top and dry as a bone down below. So that corrects their watering problems. So you need to do that. And you also need to consider the time of year and how much to water too. You know, during the summer months, we're watering more, during the winter less. So people that have automatic irrigation systems, those need to be monitored constantly. They need to be adjusted. They need to be moved. You know, I'm a firm believer in drip irrigation for saving water on a hillside where you can't yank your hose up there. But I'm also a firm believer in hand watering because you're out with the plants, you're watching for any bugs and diseases before they get out of hand, and you're also looking. If it seems wet, you don't water it. In drip irrigation, the problem is the emitter drips water and it goes down into the ground like a pyramid. Well, unless you have drips all the way around the plant to get that full circumference, you're going to have dry spots, especially if you're converting a spray system to a drip system, you're going to have major problems. So instead of a drip system, what I like to, for conserve water, is I like to put a flood bubbler system in. You can get low gallonage flood bubblers, but what you're doing is you're creating that moat around the plant. You've got a bubbler in there that will fill the moat with water, which also helps in fertilization. How do you fertilize with a drip irrigation system? Unless you have an injector in it, which you can do. But then again, if you have a drip irrigation system, you don't check all your heads, you're not going to know a head's not emitting until the plant's there. So it's really, it's got its place, but the conservation of water is keeping an eye on watering enough, keeping an eye, make sure there's no runoff, watering early in the morning instead of at night. And this will help you conserve water just that way. Mulching is a great idea. I'm really a firm person in mulching, except if you're using any kind of a raw mulch, you don't put it under the plant, you put it around the plant. Whenever you put bark, wood chips, and mulch that isn't been broken down, it robs the plants from nutrients to feed the bacteria to break it down. When you get a compost, it should have in it some fertilizer to help it finish breaking down, and it should have in it also mycorrhizome bacteria. There's this whole new thing about the past few years about mycorrhizome bacteria. So what it does basically is it helps the roots take up nutrients, okay? All soils have it. Depending on how well the soil is maintained, if it's been dry for years, it's going to have a lot less of it, or it'll be dormant. But if it's maintained in a garden situation, you should have mycorrhizome already in it. If it's a new area you're planting, you need to introduce mycorrhizome into it. We've gotten to the point where our compost is that already inoculated into it. And our compost goes in our topsoil, so the topsoil gets inoculated. We also inoculate our potting soil with it, and our potting soil with it, and all. So this is important because that's the life of the soil. But the moment you start using unorganic fertilizers or anything on the soil that's not organic, you start killing the bacteria. And that's why large farms have to constantly fertilize and fight to get the fertilizer in and use chemical fertilizer because they're farming on dead soil. And it takes 2 or 3 years on that kind of a situation to build its health back in the soil, to build a life back in the soil. You know, we've been mulching around the nursery, not under plants, but all around the nursery. We pick out something that's really cheap. It's pine grindings, okay? So years ago, I used to bring in bark from up in Oregon. And I used to have to buy 120 yards at a time. I was giving a lot, selling a lot to the city and stuff. And I started thinking, besides the cost of it, the carbon footprint of bringing it down here, it wasn't the right thing to do. So I started thinking what we do in the nursery. We have tree trimmers drop off pine grindings. Why did I choose pine? But pine's acidic, okay? Eucalypts and Brazilian pepper trees, not only do they have seeds that could germinate, but it's got an oil that will affect the soil. That's why stuff doesn't grow underneath the darn things. But what this acidic mulch does around our nursery is it makes to where if I took every plant off this nursery and tilled it under, I could plant something in it and it would grow. And when I move the piles of our mulch, old mulch that's there, our nursery is full with earthworms all throughout the nursery because we've used this product. I won't use anything that they got this bark that's got coloration put in it. It's not natural. But anything that's natural in Mother Nature, trees fall in the woods, they break down, they create a mulch, they create bacteria. You know, this is where that happens. And I encourage people when they're trimming hedges and stuff is to take that stuff and compost it and break it down so it's black like soil and put it back under your plants. I was asked to be on an advisory group with the Port District. And what they were trying to find is different ways of maintaining the parks around the bay. I was the only one in there that was into organics. Everybody else wasn't. And so I was talking to them about when you trim your hedges, just throw the garbage underneath the hedges. It'll help keep the moisture around. And when you mow your lawns, don't mow them so tightly. Let them grow a little more. And then they said, well, we have problems with weeds. And I said, well, there's something that you can take care of that with. It's called corn gluten. Corn gluten is a byproduct from the corn industry. It's got 7% nitrogen in it. It is acidic, and it stops weeds from germinating. It lasts for about 6 or 8 months. It goes on about 2 pounds per 100 square feet. But it was funny because I gave them 10 pounds to try out. And a month later, they called me up. They said, we can't use this. I said, why? Because it's attracting rats. Okay. So I'm at a trade show one day, and I found this new product that's natural. It kills rats. It's called Radex. You look on the back of it, it's made out of corn gluten and sodium. So these rats were eating this stuff and going to try to get a drink of water out of the ocean. They were dying. By that time, the program folded. They did nothing that I asked them to do. And I said, what a waste of my time. You know, I've been in this town and in this business so long now that I know that there's certain things that it's useless to get involved in. And one is giving advice to people that don't take it seriously. I used to give free advice years ago, but nobody was out there with a pen and a piece of paper writing this stuff down. And then they would call me a week later and ask me the same question. I said, I got to charge them for this because they're not going to listen and write it down. It's got to have a value to it. So I started doing that. And years ago, I didn't charge for deliveries. So one day I was delivering 2 yards of soil to a guy's house. He had 2 pickup trucks in the driveway. I said, what's wrong with those? He goes, well, I didn't want to get them dirty. I said, fuck, that's it. So we had to start charging for deliveries. And now we have a driver, so that makes it even that way. But you know, the stuff that I'm talking about is stuff that it's so simple to do. Garden should not be a burden. If you've got a brown thumb, generally it's because you don't have the time to put it in the garden. And the gentleman was talking earlier about having foliage indoors. I think it's the best thing in the world. It's just that if you take certain foliage plants to clear the air, you need quite a few of them to clear the air in a room. But it also mentally does stuff to people. You know, I go into doctor's offices, into hospitals saying, these places need plants. I was stuck at Scripps Green. I was there for a week for some things, health reasons I have. And I was in this room. I said, I got to have air and greenery. So they moved me to a view of the golf course and the ocean. I couldn't open the window. I'm sitting there going, this is going to drive me nuts. And that week was miserable. And I got out and I got back to my nursery, and I'm surrounded by plants and animals. I said, I don't know if I'm ever going to do that again. I couldn't have any visitors because of COVID and stuff like that. But it's so much mentally comforting when you're out working in the garden and you get results. Mother Nature is really showing her stuff during COVID because there's a lot less usage of areas and they're growing back. I was in Balboa Park at the Morley House. There's a rose garden next to it. Those flowers are so vivid this year. Gorgeous yellows and reds. You were like, Mother Nature was putting on a show here. They were so beautiful. And the lawns. We have a park down the street here that's not used much now. The lawns are repaired and they look nice and green now instead of beaten to death. And so we have to appreciate Mother Nature and what we're doing. They came out with this whole program of Xeriscape. Well, Xeriscape doesn't mean zero escape. It means putting plants where they need to be that they'll do good. But if you have an active area, have a lawn. You know that every 100 square feet of greenery provides enough oxygen for 4 people to live on. Yet people are putting rocks and cactus in their front yard because of the water situation. It's never going to get any better. You can collect rainwater and that's good and all. And I have a pond here. I have a duck pond, and we empty it out every 2 days because it's full of duck poop, but it goes back onto our plants. And also we have a way of doing that. Gray water is a neat idea. So there's ways to improve your water to where the only way they're going to make you stop watering is what they did a while ago is say you can't do it and have people turning their neighbors in. But you get a neighborhood that all the lawns are dead in. At the street for me, they had one. Abandoned cars started going in there because it made it conducive not to be a beautiful looking yard. And I'm so happy that you guys have garden tours to help people understand that gardening isn't just planting plants and making your yard look beautiful. It's for you to go out and enjoy. It's for you to go and get your solace out there. So how am I doing?
Hey, Bill, can I ask you a question going back to amending soil? What is the best method? How deep do you have to amend soil? Is there a rule of thumb for that?
Okay. So if you have a garden, say a vegetable garden or flower garden, you're going to redo it. Okay. There's 4 things I look for. I look for nutrient content, pH, and sand, salt, clay. I do this and I don't charge customers for it. I take a little time with it. Like I've got 12 of them sitting on this is my office and my laboratory here, laboratory. And so, but I do this because you need to know what to do. Now, if you didn't want to go through that hassle, you take a glass jar, and you put a third of the way full of soil, and you fill it up with water, and you shake it. The rock and sand are going to land first, silt and clay, and then organic matter. That organic matter should be 30% of your soil volume. I've had people come in where it's 80% of their soil volume. I said, you got to put plain dirt in here. There's too much organic matter. So those are things to look for. I don't know after me if this will continue, but I really feel good about if somebody asks me what should I put my hole, I'm not telling them a bag of compost and this and that. I'm telling them if there's no compost in the dirt, 30% would be the part I would put. If you're planting a blueberry plant, you want to get 30 to 50% of a core fiber of peat moss. So wire fiber, whatever what it is from coconut husk. Why we sell that more is because peat bogs are mined and excavated, and that's a source that dwindles. There's always coconut shells out there, and they're always available, and it's a byproduct. And so we brought that in. We sell both, but we brought that in our soil mixes that I make my potting soil. It's core fiber. And the reason I made a potting soil was I've been in business for so many years, The Miracle Grow is great. Whitney Farms had a good soil for a while, for those who remember Whitney Farms. We have a good soil that we get from a company called Fox Farm. It's a good soil, but they're growing really big. We keep an eye on that soil because if they get too big and their quality goes down, we're going to drop it. But we have nothing else that we really believe in. And so it took me 14 years to do this, and this is the cute part of the story. 14 years to do it, and I send out 5 samples to my customers to try it. And I put a little bit of fertilizer in, but the mycorrhizone and all this. And out of the 5, 2 of them came back saying they liked it, and 3 said they didn't like it. I'm sitting there going, this is a problem. It can't be. There's got to be a solution here. And what I didn't realize was I needed to have the stuff wait a week or 2, get the mycorrhizone to colonize in it. And after that, it became good. I don't add fertilizer to it that much because people use it for different things. And so thus, when you get a soil, you should be able to customize the plant food you're going to need to the plants that you need. So that was a long story about that. But soils are very important, probably the most important thing to a successful plant. You know, people come in and say, oh, your plants are so much better than so-and-so. I said, it's not the plant. It's the knowledge that you're listening to and planting it with. You know, I source my plants from as much organic sources. And I told my son, I said, the one thing we can't do is forget about the small suppliers, because the big suppliers are in everywhere. And it's unfortunately, we used to have 3 fruit tree suppliers. There was Orange County, there was Ellie Cook, and Dave Wilson. Dave Wilson's got the market on it. And they could do a good product. I'm not saying anything negative about it, but everybody's eggs are in their basket. And sometimes their pricing is different with the larger purchasers than they are with me. And we just gotta whatever. But I also source out some of my smaller stuff to smaller nurseries throughout the United States. I even get some stuff in from Canada, some of our herbs. We used to buy from a really great company. It was called small company. It was an herb grower, and it was up. It's still there. And her and her husband were up in like Vista. Anyways, and they decided not to go wholesale anymore. We were their last customer. I said, what are we going to do? So we started sourcing organic herbs from all over the place. Got some weird ones in. We grow as much as we can, but with the pandemic, I had to go to pre-grown stuff. I mean, our greenhouses were full, and I'm trying to build another greenhouse, but my son's putting the kibosh on it right now because I want to build it on top of one of our buildings. I've got this 80 by 40-foot building I could put a greenhouse on. I look at all that growing space, and no, I've gotten them into too much trouble. So I've got some goals in my life. But anyway, so yeah, soils, home check, that's the best thing to do. And we have a sheet that if you're planting a tree, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. But making sure that you loosen the root balls on all your plants. The Landscape Architect Association was hitting the nurseries up and saying, we can't sell landscapers plants that have roots that are encircling. Okay, so you want a 3-foot plant in a 5-gallon pot? We're the growers, you're the spec people. When we used to plant stuff, we used to loosen the root ball for a little while. Perfectly fine. You know? So, you know, I've gone through a lot of stuff in my years, and the fact is, it's how you plant your plant. The only 2 plants you never loosen the root ball on, bougainvilleas and avocados. They're so freaking sensitive. So an avocado tree, you set it in the ground, you backfill with amended soil, and you water it. You don't even look cross-eyed at it. It don't come out of the pot, that's the pot. They're really sensitive. If they should defoliate because of shock or anything, you put a shade cloth over them because the foliage protects the little limbs from burning back and having all this dead and burning down to the ground. So that's what you do to those. Years ago, I learned about the bougainvilleas. I installed 30 bougainvilleas in an apartment complex. I used to do landscaping and maintenance and I loved it.
Mhm.
Now, I hated it then, but I loved it now because what I learned. So I planted all these bougainvilleas, and a week later, a guy comes up to me and he goes, "You need to replace this. They're all defoliated." And
Oh,
I
man.
said, "Hold it a minute." I said, "Give me 3 weeks. And if so, I'll replace them all." 3 weeks I came back, they refoliated. They just shot.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's, I'm hoping that I can take what's in here and pass it on to my crew and my son before in here doesn't work anymore. Because it's so unique and interesting. And I work with people. I work
Yeah.
with people that I generally I have 3 right now, but I generally have 5 beehives on the nursery here.
Wow.
And I have a couple people that are maintaining it because I didn't have the time. My son didn't have time to what all the heck. And this person has taught me with these beehives, if I act a certain way, I go in without any protection on. I open the hive tops and you move slowly. You can talk to them, whatever, and they don't bother you. And if they do buzz around your head, you just leave them. They land on you, they leave them. They're not going to hit you hard unless they're a rogue hive, but mines are calm. And I'll tell you one other cute story about it. So there's a gal helping her too, and this gal is really unique because not only she does bees, but she takes different things like rust and stuff and tries to make dyes for clothes. And she made me a little bit of ice cream the other day. It was made out of fig leaves, not figs, but fig leaves. It was great. So she went up to save a hive up in Vista, and it was a small hive, and they were very calm. And so the lady's yard that she took over, she goes, "What grows around there?" He goes, "Not really, except there's a huge pot farm out there." So she brings this hive back, and we put it in place. We open the top up, and she goes, "Watch this." And I put my hand, well, put your hand there. I put my hand right next to the bees. They crawled on, they crawled off. I said, "These bees are on something," which wherever the bees get their honey, the flavor is going to go into the honey.
Mm-hmm.
And so thus, it could be another way of inducing that kind of stuff in you by having the right honey without having to manually do it. And I have another thing I do is I have a honey extractor. So I rent it out. This is where you take the comb and you spin it and the honey comes out. So I rent it out for £1 a day. About 6 years ago, some guy brought me in a pound. I tasted it. It's the best honey I've ever tasted in my life to this day. And I say, "Where do you live?" He goes, Mira Mesa. No, not Mira Mesa. Right above the stadium.
Sarah Mesa.
Sarah Mesa. I said, "Wow, I just can't put my finger on this stuff." And so I kept asking around. And somebody finally told me that there's a large Asian population and they have a lot of loquat trees. That's what this honey tastes like. So last year, some guy comes in, borrows the thing, brings in a sample of honey. I taste it. I go, "Where do you live?" He goes, "Well, I'm renting this house from a guy that had a beehive up in Sarah Mesa. He's got the house that the honey came from."
Interesting.
So it's so cool knowing that what Mother Nature's created is she's created flavors from where the bees get the honey. It's incredible. I stay away from dark honeys because a lot of times they're eucalyptus and not have the flavors to them. But there's a lot of good honey out there, and you find the source, and you'll know what the flavor will be in the honey. Without having it induced, and I will never buy imported honey in my life because this is all from people I know. I have a guy named Engineer Bob. He's got a plethora of honey. He's out in say Blossom Valley, whatever, and he's going to be bringing me in his honey, which is local. Well, he's an engineer. It's taken him months to create a label. He makes it. He has to change it. He has to change it again. I said, "Just bring me the honey, and we'll put Engineer Bob's honey at City Farmers on it. Come on." So I'm waiting for him. But that's another thing people get into. They're afraid of it. But you get a hive and it's legal in the city, and you learn about how bees live and what they do. You know, bees come out of a hive in a straight line. That's why the rules are you have a barrier around them so they go up in the air, not in somebody's face. They need water. If they don't have water, they'll go to your neighbor's water. And they need to be checked because they get their problems too. And you check for ants, for mites, for wax moths. But otherwise, you keep them healthy. Like if we keep our plants healthy, they're going to rid this stuff off anyway. So healthy plants, healthy people. I think that's what the cure is in life, to living a good life. You know. Okay, that was only one question. Am I pushing it?
I wonder if there are any other questions that anyone might have.
I have a question.
Judith?
Okay.
Okay, first I want to thank you so much. This is so interesting, and I have been
Yeah.
taking notes. I really have. So you mentioned the importance of digging a hole wide and not so much deep. I have problems when the root balls are so compacted. I soak it in water before I plant it, but still I'm not able to loosen it enough to really get the roots to spread out. What should I do?
Okay. So that being the case, what you're going to have to do is do a little root trimming. But there's a balance between roots and shoots. So what you're going to do is you're going to trim the top down maybe as much as you can. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to do a little trimming to break that root ball up a little better. Because if you cut too much of the top off when you plant it, those roots will push new growth to balance it off. I don't know if any of you do bonsai work, but bonsai is the same way. There's a balance between roots and shoots. So what you're doing with the bonsai is creating a miniature tree, but you're trimming the roots to keep it in the pot that you want, and so it grows slow. So I would look at it from that point of view. Or if you're going to move a plant, let's say you want to move something that's not ridiculously big, you figure out how much of that root ball you're going to lose, and you trim the plant back to somewhat match it a little bit before. Then you can dig it up and lose some of the roots and move it. Years ago when I was younger and had the energy, I used to go to building sites. If they had a backhoe, I'd have them dig out some of the old junipers and some of the old twisted junipers and a few other things. But I would trim them into bonsais before they did it, bring it back and plant them, and they did fine. So whenever you need to trim roots, you need to trim shoots, and always over trim your shoots to compensate for the roots.
Okay.
That make sense?
Thank you.
Good. Other questions?
Real quick, I missed on the berry vines. When should those be pruned? Because I have some that aren't doing much now, but I see new buds coming up.
That's a good question. Some things don't go dormant because it's not cold enough.
Right.
So my philosophy is if you have fruit trees or trees in the neighborhood, once they lose their leaves, it's time to trim. You know, I do that with my roses. Roses don't go completely dormant, but once my fruit trees have dropped their leaves, I'll go ahead and trim my roses. Apple trees don't drop their leaves. So what we do with our apple trees is when the fruit trees lose their leaves, I strip the leaves off my apple trees, forcing them into dormancy. So thus, they'll have that rest period. Now, the weather's been really weird. We've had cold too long, then hot, then cold again. So the fruit season was a little off. I have 5 apple trees in my nursery in the ground, and I get about 300 pounds of apples. This year, I'm going to get about maybe 100 pounds of apples. And that's where you learn how to can, how to dehydrate, how to preserve. And, you know, I do apple, I make apple chews. They'll last 2 or 3 years. And they're still good because they're dried and they're rubbery and they're really good. But yeah, so you go ahead and you check the other trees and how they're doing and what it is, and making sure that the soil climate is what you're checking. Like you could have a tree out in the middle of somebody's yard and it defoliates, but there's one next to the street that the heat from the street is keeping it from defoliating. You need to kind of look at where the plant is. Say, okay, this plant's out in the open yard like mine. Temperature's about the same, and then trim it and all. The other thing I learned from a really, really, really nice person I got to know very well is Dick Streeper. And Dick Streeper had a bunch of recipes and way too much for me to even deal with. But he had one that helped roses gain healthy growth when they started growing again in the spring. And I've used it in the nursery and I've had customers use it, and it's kind of an odd mixture of stuff. But there's a reason for each. So after you prune your trees, your roses, you leave them sit until the buds start forming. And when they come up about an inch long, you do your first feeding. Not at the trunk, at the drip line. What you want to do is you want to mix a tablespoon of sulfate of ammonia, or ammonium sulfate, same stuff, or magnesium sulfate, or Epsom salt, same stuff. So one each of those, and a quarter cup of organic fertilizer. You want to water the ground, then you want to put the fertilizer on and water again. You never fertilize dry soil. You always water first and fertilize. And that'll turn a lot of that spindly growth into really healthy finger-sized growth that's growing up on.
Huh.
And then after 30 days, you start with the food to feed them. We found out this year that we had such a hot spell that we had a lot of disease problems this year. And so the guy that takes care of my rose doesn't want to do it, but I wanted her to prune them back once more. But she goes, well, we're not going to sell a lot this year, but next year we will. So, okay. But we had a boatload of disease problems. And when we first came, we were in winter and spring, early spring, the guy that came down was looking at my roses saying, God, you got the best looking roses in the world. I said, yeah, but I'm not going to brag. And sure enough, this hot weather hit and it just took a toll on my roses because of their location, you know. And so being in the ground is different. They're in plastic pots. So we still have a lot, but that's okay because we got new stuff. That's not our specialty. Our specialty is edibles, organics, but we do carry a nice selection of bonsai. When we do carry bonsai, we carry the equipment, the tools, the fertilizer, whatever we need. We do pond plants. We carry the plants. We carry pumps. We carry liner. I feel when you get into something, you have to carry everything so that way you're able to teach people everything about it. Like when you buy a pump, what size pump? Well, it depends on your lift and your flow, you know. And so I'm able to, and I'm hoping my employees are able to do this kind of thing, is to mention to people. You know, I'm sure that everybody's got leaf miner on their citrus trees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so certain insects are alive. And if I'm getting off on a tangent, let me know. Certain insects are alive and active at certain times of the year, like the Eugenia psyllid. Well, the citrus leaf miner is. So I talked to some people at the ag department. They said, don't pick the leaves off. Leave them on, all the damaged leaves, until winter. Pick all the damaged leaves off that you can. The new growth will come out clean because the insect isn't active that time of year. At the beginning of spring, you start a preventative spray once a week with a product. I think they recommended a product called Spinosad or Spinosad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you do that weekly, and that will prevent it. Right now, our citrus in our nursery, they all have it. People don't want to buy it. My employees said, let's trim it off. I said, leave it alone. But explain to them what's on it and why it's doing it, so that winter they could go ahead and do that stripping down. So.
Yeah. I have someone had another question. Should they strip off the leaves of a nectarine tree if the leaves haven't dropped off?
If they haven't dropped off in a reasonable length of time, you got to throw plants into dormancy. Reasonable means like all the trees around the neighborhood are kind of naked. Why aren't you? Yeah. Strip them off. And this is also when you prune your trees, when they're leafless, because all that nutrients down there, that's when you prune the trees. The rule of thumb on pruning trees for structure, it's a 45-90 rule. Anything bigger than a 90, it's weak. Anything tighter than a 45, you got a crotch that could get rotten, okay? The other thing you want to do with trees is to stop cross branching and to open the tree up. So like on a shade tree, just in case we had a windstorm, it won't act as a sail, but on fruit trees, it'll allow bugs, it'll allow, pollinators and the sun to get in to get the inner areas out. That's on trees that you prune.
Anyone else have any questions before we say good night? I don't see any.
I have a few lasting remarks. As most of you well know, I'm going through some health issues, and I wear everything on my sleeves, and because I have nothing to hide in my life. But I do have the fact that I had listened to a lecture from a gentleman that was a Holocaust survivor. And he said not to me, but to the crew, three things, but the one mostly that hit home was the world would be a better place if people just help people. And that, I think, what it's all about is for business owners and customers to be helpful to each other, not to be criticizing or not to be fining and doing all that stuff that a lot of our government agencies do, but to be helpful. And sharing information, I think, is one of the best things to do. And I really, really appreciate, this is one of the highlights of my week, because I do have limitations on what I can do. But even the illness that I have, which is cancer, I've learned a lot from. It's doing okay, not going quite the way I want it to go. But I looked at it as a challenge to learn and to be able to share my information with them. There's a group in Utah which are studying, there's 200 doctors studying the type I have. It's a rare one. There's about 8 out of every 10,000 people get it. It's called carcinoma, which is 2 types of cancers, which is a bile duct and a liver cancer at the same time. And I looked at this as, okay, it's in faith, but I also want to know what the hell the doctors are doing. I question them. I ask them if they've tried things, and this is what's kept me going. And the fact that I am contributing to, in any way, to having all my information available to these people so it can help somebody else. And what better way to live a legacy to me than helping as many people as I can get into what they're doing, what I'm doing, get into gardening, and to learn the pleasures of it. So thank you for the privilege of talking to your group. I appreciate it.
So this was great. We really appreciate it, Bill. It was good to see you. And I think we have some people that are going to come down and check your place out and ask more questions if they didn't write it down.
I'm around. I'll be glad to help them. That's my thing now, is answering questions.
Thank you, Bill. Stay safe. Stay as healthy as possible.
I do.
I've gone through that process with a loved one, and wishing you all the best in terms of just quality of life.
Me too. Only I've had it.
I have
twice, and I'm fine.
Yes.
And I hope you will be too.
I will. I will.
It's nice to see Bill again.
Soon. So
invite me back whenever you want. Okay.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you very, very much. We'll be in touch again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
And have a good night. And now I'm going to eat dinner.
Oh, good. Okay. Bye, Bill. It's good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I forgot to turn this thing off.
Down in the corner, Lee.
Click end.
Steve, there we go. There it is. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. That was
Good night.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Everybody.
My pleasure.